she got this notice that she would have to have someone with her when she crossed the stage to get her diploma. She said, I wrote a very strongly worded letter to the president of the university, and she walked across that stage on her own.
Welcome back to Educator University. Have you ever wondered what it's like to teach a student who can't see the board, the books, or even the way you're standing up? Today we're talking with Gail Showalter, a teacher with over 20 years of experience, including a decade teaching Braille. She used her experience to train future teachers at Lamar University and has started a nonprofit that empowers single mothers. In this episode, we'll explore what teaching Braille looks like, the strategies that make it work, and the lessons all teachers can bring back to their classroom. Welcome, Gail.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here.
Yes, so glad you're here. I think for teachers who've never taught a student who is blind, I'm really curious, what are the things that they should understand about students who are learning through Braille?
Well, there's so much. I'll try to condense it some. First of all, if Braille is their only disability, that's a big difference than students who have a visual impairment in addition to other disabilities. Don't confuse the fact that they are blind and a Braille reader with other things. In other words, don't blame this or that or the other problem on the blindness, which it may not be. Some students may have Asperger's. They may have Lowe's syndrome. They may have had Leber syndrome, which causes blindness. So you need to inform yourself before you get started. Now, where I live in Texas, we do mainstreaming. I don't know what all the other states call it, inclusion or mainstreaming, but most students who are what we call in the industry vanilla blind, in other words, they don't have any other disabilities, they are able to maneuver and function in a classroom with other students as long as they receive the materials and the instruction that they need. And they do need extra instruction. It's like they're learning with a different language, and then they have to have the materials. And that becomes the big boondoggle in some cases. Now, when I was teaching, we had some electronics. Now there's massive technology that makes this even easier than it used to be. But you still have to have a good instructor. And there are, I'm sorry to say, few and far between really good VI instructors, teachers of the visually impaired. So I do encourage anyone who's listening that might be interested in doing that to look into it, because it's a demanding career and it's also an honorable career. And so the first thing a teacher needs to be is accepting of the situation and to realize she has to learn a few things, but mostly these students are just like their other students, except for the visual problem. Now, that's a big issue. It is a big nuisance for people who are blind, but it's also a great challenge for these teachers. And I've worked with some fabulous teachers that had never had a visually impaired student in their classrooms. So it's a workable, doable situation. And yes, you may only in your career, you may only have one, but consider that a special opportunity. I can talk later about the students that I had that are now grown and doing very well. So that's always, good to be able to see over many years the success rates. Not all of them, but a lot of them are doing well.
That is such a positive experience to hear about. I am really curious about fluency in reading. Is it similar to a traditional learning experience when it comes to reading Braille, or are there really things that are unique to this experience?
Well, yeah, of course it is unique. And that's the reason that the law states that children who are visually impaired get services from the schools from the time they're born. Because if you think about child development, baby pushes its head up off of the surface or the mattress because it's curious to see something. And that develops the muscles in the shoulders because they're pushing themselves up, tilting their head up. So babies that don't have that motivation may never get that development. unless they're encouraged to do so. It does take occupational and physical therapists to help with this, and parents who are good at intervening and helping their baby to develop. And also, as they get older, we play games. They learn to get objects out of a big bowl or barrel of rice so that their sensitivities of their fingertips are developed early. And so we play games like that and teach them to follow a bumpy line, first of all, before any letters or anything are involved. You teach them to identify the tips of their fingers, what it is they're touching, and how to move from left to right across the page. And so there's all kinds of activities that a teacher of the visually impaired is aware of, and they use to teach that baby. So a child who comes into the school system and has had that and has had the early childhood intervention from really young, those children are going to do better. Now, the ones who maybe, like I've had, who lose vision maybe in the 5th grade or 6th grade, they're going to have a little more trouble because they weren't prepared for that. And I can recall a student that was in high school, and the parents just couldn't accept that this boy needed to learn to read, and he was going to need to read Braille. Now, there are people who say, well, they don't need that now because there are audiobooks, and yes, there are audiobooks, and yes, you can get audio textbooks through your state library or through the Library of Congress, we call it. But the problem is, and Helen Keller would go crazy about this, they want to be able to read like other people do. You know, they want to be able to read a book without having to go through an act of Congress to get the book on an audio. And then sometimes, just as you can imagine, if you've listened to audiobooks versus print books, there's some real advantages to those print books, and that you can go back and reread a line and take your time with it and that sort of thing. So these are all concepts that regular education teachers would benefit from knowing.
So, in terms of immersion, you mentioned earlier, I'm imagining these students will be in the classroom and then they'll have a book. For example, if the students are reading a novel together, then that student would have the same novel in Braille. Is that kind of how it works usually?
It could be Braille or it can be low print. Now, a large print, low vision, large print, what we do with some students was they have closed circuit televisions on their desk. They can put the book in and read because it's enlarged, and they can clarify it, and that makes it easier for them, those students. But yes, most books can be acquired in Braille through the state.
Math, like how does that work with the Braille?
A man named Nemeth, we have something called Nemeth Code Braille, named after Nemeth, and it's a new learning process. It's still Braille, but it's coded differently. And so there's a symbol in front of a number. And then when you get to algebra, you have numbers and letters mixed and so forth. So it is a learning process that has to be carefully introduced to students. And a lot of times teachers will use, in young classes, they will use manipulatives like little cones, little cubes, little wooden pieces to illustrate geometrical shapes and things. Because most of the standardized tests, at least, that have raised lines can't illustrate a 3-dimensional shape. I have a student that's still in Austin now, and she's working on a PhD. She has been published because she had a professor that she worked with. She explained that this isn't workable to him. He got interested, and they had journal articles published about how to teach this to a student who doesn't have vision. So we're making a lot of progress electronically and educationally. Yeah, lots of progress.
Yeah, and I think hearing that your student got a PhD, I mean, of course we know these things, but just hearing that what you're doing is really important for these students to be able to access the world and to really achieve success like that. Really incredible. Yeah.
It is. It's a thrill. She's not the only one that's highly educated either.
Yeah.
So it's been amazing to watch them grow up and, take on their lives. It's just been real thrilling.
Yeah, yeah. I'm kind of curious what some of the challenges are in terms of things that are unique to students who are learning Braille. Are there things that you've noticed, the kind of themes that are really just challenges that they have to work through, maybe personally or as they work through their studies?
Yeah. Well, one of them is, when you're having a conversation with someone, you have maybe 85% of the communication is visual. You have cues, cues from a person when they're finished listening to you, for example, or when they're bored or when they're no longer making eye contact with you. So we do a lot of our conversational communication visually, and we don't even think about it. Sometimes in a classroom, I would have students who wanted an answer from the teacher. They would raise their hands because they knew that's what they were supposed to do. The teacher might be on the other side of the room helping somebody else, and the student might become impatient, not realizing that the teacher didn't see them raise their hand and was on the other side of the room. So there are all sorts of situations like that that occur. And teachers, really smart and astute teachers, didn't have trouble. They figured it out pretty quickly, how to communicate that way. But that is sometimes an issue in a classroom. For a child has to assimilate with a group of other students, it needs to be gradual. If they start out in a preschool program, then they start to learn these things earlier. Now, a lot of the students will have a mobility instructor. We call it O&M, orientation and mobility. There are instructors for that all over the country, and they help children learn how to manipulate in their environment. So if you move furniture in a classroom, you really need to let the student know before they just walk in and try to get to their desk. So the students who get O&M get training with this person on a regular basis. They learn how to use a white cane and they learn how to use it appropriately. And so those are big issues: orientation, mobility, how to get around in a classroom. Now, I had one student who is now, of course, a grown woman, and she navigated the entire campus of A&M University in Texas on her own, very independently. She ended up working in Washington, D.C. for K. Bailey Hutchinson. She was just she is a remarkable person. And when it came time to graduate, after 4 years, she got this notice that she would have to have someone with her when she crossed the stage to get her diploma because they were afraid she might fall or trip or something. So she tickled me. She said, I wrote a very strongly worded letter to the president of the university, and she walked across that stage on her own. It's a personality also. You're not just, it's not just this person that happens to be blind. They have their own personalities. They're individuals. So you have to work with that as well. And some
Yeah,
of them are outgoing, and some of them are introverts too. So you have every kind of person.
yeah, that's a really inspiring story that she advocated for herself in that way to say, I'm going to walk across that stage. I love it. You've already
Yeah.
shared some stories that have really stuck with you, but is there a student, a story that you could share that really was a breakthrough? A student had a breakthrough that you just keep thinking about even as you've left teaching?
Oh, many, but I'll tell you one that I love. The younger girl that I taught to actually read from the beginning, met her when she was in preschool, and she was delightful, beautiful blonde curls, just a sweetest thing. But she was a pistol. You knew that she was smart. I mean, she could think through things, even though she was born totally blind, so, which is really, really rare, thank goodness. But most children have some sight, some shadows, or she had no vision. So it was a genetic disorder. And I was teaching her to read, and we had these little readers. And one of the little readers was Stevie Wonder's story. And it was just a few pages, and it was very simple. We call it, there's contracted Braille, and then there's regular Braille, which is A, B, C, D. And then we have contractions, which make it faster. But so this was real basic Braille. And it was one of her first opportunities to read. and we were reading this little book, and he talked about living in poverty, and he talked about racial prejudice and how he was mistreated. And so when we get through with the book, she said to me, "What is racism?" And I thought, "Oh, this is heavy. I got to be careful how I answer this." So I said, "Well, some people's skin is light colored." Now, that's even for her, that would be a stretch, but some people's skin is light colored and some people's skin is dark colored. And sometimes the people with light colored skin are not really nice to the people with dark colored skin. And we call that racism. And I could see the little wheels turning in her head. And she said to me, "What color is my skin?" Out of the mouths of babes, she made you think about the things that sighted people think are so important. And she just broke that code right down the middle. It's just like, my goodness. That story has stuck with me for years. Because to her, why would people be, she was already different enough. She didn't want to, yeah, that was one of the stories I remember. There's some other ones more humorous, but we went through a lot of years together, and they amazed me. I learned a lot. In fact, the last chapter in my book is about the things I learned from these students. They taught me a lot.
So powerful. And what a lesson we can learn about just how silly sometimes we like I think about society and it's like, why do we care so much, right? Like why is there what's going on? Like such a great perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. So kind of moving into like thinking about teaching Braille and you've shared some really inspiring stories so far. Are there any specific skills or approaches that are essential when teaching Braille versus maybe more traditional teaching that you had to develop as a teacher of Braille?
Excellent question. I was not originally a reading teacher, so this was a whole new ballgame for me. I was recruited into this, and then I had to go back to school. So I had to learn as much as I could as fast as I could because the teacher before me had to move away. And most of the time, school districts do not have as many Braille readers as I had at the time. Since, thank goodness there's not that many, but it's a pretty intense requirement. And most parents don't want to send their students to a residential school somewhere else in another city. So, yes, you had to start to learn how to approach the person. You don't walk up behind them and tap them on the head or something like that. You learn how to explain, "I'm standing here next to you on your right," and you give them information that they need to be aware of. That's all. And you learn to do what we call hand over hand. So you would put your hand on top of their hand to show them something. Just little techniques like that. Lots of times in a school, for the listeners, lots of times in the schools, if the teacher's going to have a student who is blind in her classroom or his classroom, the teacher of the visually impaired will have like a workshop for those teachers. And certainly I encourage, if they aren't having a workshop, that those teachers, as soon as they know they're assigned a student who is a Braille reader or a low vision student, they request conference time with the teacher of the visually impaired to get as much information as they can about how to prepare for the student and to not confuse deafness and blindness. Just because a student's blind doesn't mean you have to shout. They can hear you. There's a lot of confusion sometimes, believe it or not, about that. And learning to speak to them in a descriptive way. I'm recalling a teacher that was an algebra teacher in a high school. And he was not, a great scientist or anything. He was just a basic algebra teacher. But he was one of the best ones because he picked up on the need to describe everything he was putting up on the board. If he was illustrating a math problem or an algebra problem, he would say it as he put it up. He wouldn't just put 4 over 6 equals x over y equals, and he wouldn't just put it up there. He would say it. And so she, the student, could keep up with what was happening. And I complimented him, but he just, that was just good common sense to him. He didn't have to be told that. But some teachers do. I mean, I was in another math class in another school, a similar grade level, and the teacher just wrote a problem on the board, said, "Look on your books, do these problems," and then sat down at her desk. And that didn't work. I mean, I was there. I could help some, but I couldn't be there every day because I had other students. And so those kind of things, some of it's just basic common sense. But you have to have enough empathy to realize what you're doing and how it's coming across to the student. If they need further instruction, then you need to be able to supply that instruction, even if you don't know Braille. But most of the time, the materials nowadays will have print as well as Braille on the page. So the teacher that's visual learner, teacher that can see, will look and see that and will realize this is the problem. She doesn't have to learn the code or the Braille in order to help the student. Where a teacher might panic and think that she's going to have to learn all this, which is not really the case.
Yeah, and I think that this inclusion model you're referring to is actually kind of new to me because in my district, for example, I'm not sure about blindness, but we have a deaf school for students who are deaf. So I'm kind of curious. It's actually a school, and actually we also have inclusion, but there's an option for parents. So it sounds like where you're from, the only model is inclusion. Is there other opportunities for teachers to also, I mean, for students to also choose like their own? Is there a school just for Braille too, as well, or not?
There is a school in Austin, Texas for the blind.
Hmm.
There's also a school in Austin for the deaf. And what people probably don't even think about is deafness is as profound, if not more profound, than blindness. Most people don't think that way, but being totally deaf isolates you completely. And so that's a huge other topic, and some parents might have that option, but not all of them can send all of these students to Austin. We did send one student to Austin who was also autistic. He had severe Asperger's, and he went to school in Austin and then went to a home later. And, that was good for him. It has to be individualized. I keep coming back to the day I walked into this middle school at the beginning of the year, and an older lady, probably my age, but anyway, she was older at the time. And she walked up to me and she was angry because she was going to have my student in her classroom. And she said she doesn't belong here. She needs to go to the residential school. We can't teach her. And she was a geography teacher. I mean, it wasn't rocket science. So I had to handle those kind of situations frequently. Teachers that didn't want the student to be there. Now, that student is now living independently, has a job, has a PhD, so I had to be the advocate for the student and the parent and then get paid by the school district. So I was like pulled in a lot of different directions because I got very, very close to these people. They're still friends of mine. And so, yeah, I mean, the things I may have wanted to do for the students might have gone over the line of a public school system, but I had ideas I wanted to do for them because I knew they needed it, you know? So anyway, it's quite a job, but it has its rewards, and it's beneficial for the teacher. Trying to go back to your question, it's beneficial for the teachers who are having the student included in their classrooms to get some training from teachers who are the teachers of the visually impaired and not just think they've got to figure it out all on their own. There are resources for you. And most places, I don't know what they call them in Oregon or in other states of the union, we call them educational service centers. So across the state of Texas, we have, 8 different educational service centers, and they may have training for teachers in this area, but different states might handle that a little bit differently. I don't really know.
Yeah, I am curious, kind of going back to this inclusion versus like their own school model. Is there, from your experience, have you found the inclusion model, because that seems to be the prominent model, has been more successful for students from what you're seeing in your experience?
If the student is vanilla blind, if the student doesn't have other disabilities, now there's been a great big push, to put all these students in regular classrooms and they'll bring an aide in and then and I've seen situations where they'll have a student in the classroom, but then they'll put a screen around her in the corner so she doesn't disturb the rest of the students and she's not educable. When you put students in them, and I may hit some nerves here with people, but I'm old and I don't care. I have this strong, I've been there, I've taught, I have very strong ideas about it. The students who you cannot educate, we call them, they're not educable. If you try to put them in a mainstream classroom with kids you're educating, you're lowering the standard of that classroom. But nobody's going to say that because nobody wants to be the ugly one that says that child doesn't need to be in my classroom with my kid. Nobody wants to be ugly like that. But you have students that are not able to learn. They're mentally disturbed or they're emotionally disturbed. Now, some deep places I saw, they will hire maybe 2 adult aides to work with one student that is unmanageable, you know, and that's really hard work. And then that you get into the whole debate on what's the school responsibility and what's the state's responsibility and who's going to decide. And most legislators have decided the schools need to handle everything. And then we wonder why our school systems are watered down. Well, I have opinions, and those are just my opinions, that schools are for education.
I appreciate your honesty because I think a lot of teachers feel in a way this idea of inclusion is not. I think it's a good in theory, but I think in practice, I think as teachers, we're kind of always wondering, what does it pragmatically look like? And like you said, there's different dynamics for different students. And I think that that idea of being more individualized with that idea is something that I think a lot of teachers listening are kind of nodding their heads along with you. So I don't think you're the only one who's thinking that.
I
Yeah.
may I may be the only one who's brave enough to say that, but you know, I've seen it. I've seen these
Yeah.
situations, and I contracted in a school in another city, and I saw things happening there, and I thought, "My, this is just not good. Not such good
Yeah.
situations."
It's crazy out there
But it's a
sometimes.
lot of money. It takes a lot of money out of the school system to take care of this too. A lot of money.
Kind of moving back into the Braille idea, if there's a teacher listening who's thinking, I might be interested in becoming a teacher of the blind or helping students learn Braille, do you have suggestions for resources they could connect with to help that process begin?
They need to go to the computer. They need to find out where they can get this certification because it's not, you can't go to every university and get it. See, I was able at the time to go to the University of Texas, and they had 2 wonderful professors there, but they closed that program. One of those professors went to Vanderbilt, another one went to Arizona, and then they opened something in Stephen F. Austin, which is in East Texas. I think they may still certify, but if there was a student, if you're listening and you're interested in doing this kind of work, you need to see what universities will provide you with the credentials that you need to be a teacher of the visually impaired. It's not just a Braille teacher, that's just part of it. Because, like I said, there are a lot of students with varying degrees of disability, of visual disabilities.
Is it a master's degree or is it an endorsement usually? Okay.
In Texas, it's called a teaching certificate. Like you get a teaching certificate to teach English, you get a teaching certificate to teach art, which I did, and all those things. So you get your degree, but it's usually a 4-year degree with a teaching certificate in certain subjects. So that's what it is. It's also, you have to get a degree in special education with a certificate in this, because I did have to go back and get that degree in special ed, including the certification in visual impairment.
Yeah. So it is pretty extensive training if people want to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to really wanna do it, and I would suggest that you visit someone who's doing it or talk to someone because you don't wanna dive into you don't wanna be dumped into it like, "Oh, well, you just throw me in," you know? That wouldn't be my suggestion, but, it's still there's that, and then there's the certificate to be an O&M instructor, orientation and mobility instructors, and they just train children in the use of a white cane, how to get around, and all these kind of things that they need, you know, to
That's
be in
really
our
good.
world.
Yeah, it's a really good reminder that there's multiple ways. If you're interested in supporting these students, there's multiple ways to be part of that team. If teaching isn't part of it, maybe it's like you said, being a mobility instructor as well. Teaching Braille is all about helping students gain independence and confidence. And you also recently started not recently, but you started a nonprofit for single mothers. Has teaching Braille been part of that conversation? I'm kind of curious if that was part of the reason you decided to open this nonprofit.
Actually, no, I was a single mom for 16 years and had 3 kids and raised them and went through all the difficulties. So I was a writer. I started writing many years ago, and slowly over the years, this story would publish, and finally I thought, well, I'm just gonna put all this together, and we did. We put it together in a book, but there really wasn't a specific connection between the special education and the single mothers per se. I had the compassion for single mothers because I had been through that personally.
Yes, yes. I wonder if when you're teaching Braille, is it about kind of confidence and independence? Is that similar with what you're doing with single mothers? Are you trying to build that confidence, or what exactly does your organization do?
Well, the organization is set up to provide emotional, financial, and spiritual support for single moms who are trying to finish a 2-year degree that leads to significant employment. Because I found that a lot of the single moms didn't have the education I had, and they are really struggling. I've learned that the 10 million single moms in the United States, one third of them live in poverty. And a lot of that is because they don't have a skill and they don't have a way to go back to school while they're raising kids. So I model this, there are other organizations, much larger organizations that do this sort of thing. And so we started small with one mom, and now we have several moms that have graduated and are working and providing for their families. It's just another big honor of my life that I got to do this and continue to do it. In fact, we have a board of directors now, and I just step back and let them do it. But yeah, there are so many single moms that are smart and really want to do something, but they don't know how to get past the fact that they've got to support their family at the same time. So we take them on, usually 2 years, sometimes longer, and help them get that confidence and build them up. Yes, I'm a coach. I try to build women up and help them find a way to get through. And yes, I liked to encourage my students. Some of them were more receptive than others to being, you know, guided. And so that was a joy to do. Still is, actually.
What a great thing you're doing for single mothers and continuing your passion for service and giving in that way. Sounds like you're really helping those mothers to find a new purpose and ability to provide for themselves. So,
Uh,
yeah.
Yeah, we enjoy doing it. Yeah.
As we kind of finish the conversation here, are there any final thoughts that we haven't covered that you want to share with my audience?
Well, it's sort of what you just alluded to is women need to believe in themselves. They need to believe can do this because they can. In some cultures it's much worse than it is here, but we still need to believe that it's possible. We have some good examples now. Women who've overcome obstacles and women who are speaking up and, getting out of the abuse and getting on with life and taking care of business. But I like to tell women just believe that you can do this and then research it. All it's at your fingertips. You can Google it, you can find an answer, you can find a way. And even if it's a high pie in the sky idea, go ahead and daydream a little bit.
Love that. Be brave and dream and realize what's really possible. What a great note to end on in our conversation.
Mm.
Before I let you go, I always have some fun questions the audience can wants to get to know you a little better. They're just quick questions so you can answer as long or short as you like. The first question here is what is your favorite teacher lunch?
Teacher lunch.
Yes,
Hmm. Wow, that would be a salad with avocados.
that sounds delicious. Your favorite behavior management tip for the classroom?
Be silent for a little bit. Don't say anything until everybody stops misbehaving. And then quietly point them out and maybe send them out. When I was in high school teaching, it was send them out. I don't have time to fool with that.
Yeah,
But it's
good
been
one.
a while since I've been in the classroom.
Yeah, that's good. I'm a teacher that made a difference in your life.
Yes. Lorraine Hutchins was my high school speech and drama teacher. She drove me up north of here about 5 hours to a school and got me a scholarship. And she's still a friend of mine. I still talk to her. And yeah, she had a big influence on me.
Nice to hear. All right, last question here for quick questions is last lesson you taught.
I have a course online about personalities for parents. I started studying them about 25 years ago, actually. And so I teach parents the value of understanding the personalities of themselves and their children and how that interacts in your lives. And I think it's just one of the most valuable things for people to know. I wish I had known more about it when I was in the classroom.
Yes, yes. That sounds so interesting. All right. Well, Gail, thank you so much for sharing all this information. I know my audience is going to want to connect with you possibly. Where can my audience find you? And I'll also link it right below this video for them.
Well, they can go to gailshowalter.com. I'm there, and you can learn just about everything about me on that website.
Well, thank you again for being here. I can't wait to hear the comments, and I'm excited for teachers to learn from you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been very interesting.